Alright guys, today we're going to talk about the digestive system from beginning to end in a brief video here. So of course, when we talk about the digestive system in reference to nutrition, we're talking about the absorption of nutrients, how we take them in, how we break them down, and how we dispose of the remains that we no longer need. So the digestive system is also often called the GI tract, gastrointestinal tract, or you guys may have heard it been called the alimentary canal. It's basically a hollow tube starting at the mouth, running through down to the anus. And while in there, going through there, you of course have your main organs and your accessory organs. The way to distinguish between the two is to first understand that the accessory organs do not absorb any of the nutrients, and they actually help to break down. Okay? So that being said, the main organs would be your mouth, esophagus, your stomach, small intestine, large intestine, your colon, right? Those would be your main ones as the food travels through there. The accessory organs, again, play no role in the absorption of those nutrients, but contribute to the breakdown. Things such as your liver, gallbladder, pancreas, all those secrete certain things to help break down the nutrient that you've taken in. As far as, that's all you need to know as far as organs. So again, the mouth is the site of mastication. Mastication meaning chewing. When you take something in, that's the first region that the substance comes into contact with, so your saliva. Your saliva, of course, contains the enzyme salivary amylase, which helps break down starch, as well as you also have lingual lipase in there to help the breakdown of lipids. Saliva has several functions, so it helps your immune system as well, but more importantly, or just as importantly, it coats the food that you've taken in, forming a coating over that substance, and that food that you've chewed and that has gotten into contact with the saliva now becomes a bolus, and the bolus is in that special shape to allow for easier travel through the esophagus. When the food goes down the esophagus, you of course have the epiglottis, which blocks that bolus from going into the trachea. You, of course, the bolus comes down, pushes on the epiglottis, blocking off this tube, your breathing tube. So now the bolus can continue down the other tube. And again, that is the epiglottis that is responsible for that. The way the bolus moves is via peristalsis. And peristalsis is a form of mechanical digestion. It begins with the tongue and swallowing, and the bolus moves into the stomach from there. Prior to entering the stomach, you have to pass the lower esophageal sphincter. Sphincters are very useful in keeping things where they are supposed to be. So as the bolus goes into the stomach, it passes the esophageal sphincter, which then closes once the bolus has entered the stomach. And the reason for this is, of course, the HCl, or your gastric juices that you have within the stomach, are very acidic, and we don't want those coming out retrograde up into the esophagus. There's some disorders that you may have heard about dealing with this, GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, in which the sphincter has loss of function, maybe not completely, only partially, and again, either the bolus or the stomach contents can travel retrograde up the esophagus, causing inflammation, degradation, all kinds of things in there, and we don't want that to really happen. So once in the stomach, the four regions in the stomach all aid in mixing the food with the gastric juices to further help for breakdown. And it's here that the bolus actually turns into chyme. So bolus is that same food composition that has undergone mastication, partial digestion via contact with the various saliva contents, and forms the chyme once it's in the stomach. While we are on the stomach here, I just want to mention another quick fact to you guys about the types of things that can go wrong, such as a hiatal hernia. So you guys remember where your diaphragm is, standing under the ribs across the chest. In a hiatal hernia, portion of the stomach actually travels above that and protrudes above your diaphragm. That can cause some discomfort, or it can result in, again, gastroesophageal reflux disease. And again, that's when the portion of the stomach protrudes above your diaphragm, and that's called the hiatal hernia. The stomach generally is about 60 milliliters volume, and someone or a patient undergoing gastric bypass surgery, typically about half of that volume is taken away by removal of the stomach. So after, it's reasonable to expect a gastric volume of about 30 milliliters. So again, chyme, once it's done its thing and gotten into contact with the gastric juices in the stomach, it's going to leave. And it's going to leave from the stomach into the small intestine. Just like when we entered the stomach, we had a sphincter to help keep things where they need to be. This time we're going to do the same thing, and it's called the pyloric sphincter. So the pyloric sphincter regulates what leaves the stomach and enters the small intestine. Gastric emptying is not necessarily always at a constant rate. You can have several things that affect it, such as the chyme volume. How much are you dealing with at any given point in time? The consistency, the composition, and the osmolarity, all of that chyme, as well as hormones. Several hormones come into play when regulating that. Okay, now that we're in the small intestine, remember we use the acronym DON'T JUMP IN. DJI, duodenum, jejunum, ileum. Duodenum being the first part of the small intestine, jejunum the second, and ileum the third. And remember, in the small intestine, we primarily absorb nutrients, whereas the large intestine, which we'll get to in a little bit, primarily is responsible for the absorption of water and electrolytes. In the small intestine, you have these things called villi, microvilli, that are all along the lumen, which would be the hollow area in the intestine. All these villi are finger-like projections that are aligned facing the lumen, so any nutrients floating around in there come in contact with the villi. And again, the villi increase the surface area for absorption. So now the villi pick up those nutrients and they go through the villi. They must pass through the apical border as well as the basolateral membrane border before they can enter the bloodstream or lymph system. Within the small intestine, you also have the movement of segmentation. And segmentation is literally break down the word segments off of the small intestine. So you're basically using contraction and relaxation of those circular muscles, creating a chop-like motion within the small intestine. And that promotes, again, contact with the absorptive cells, as well as contact with the various digestive enzymes that you have in there to allow for an easier breakdown of those components. From the ileum, so that would be the last part of our small intestine. Remember, duodenum, jejunum, ileum. We now progress into the large intestine, or colon, and that would be via the one more sphincter, the ileocecal sphincter, right? Ileo from ileum, cecal referring to colon, sphincter. And again, this time it functions in keeping things in place as well as keeping the bacteria, which reside in the large intestine, from traveling retrograde into the small intestine. So it keeps everything where it's supposed to be. And again, like I mentioned a few moments ago, the large intestine is responsible primarily for absorption of water and electrolytes. The large intestine, again, also eliminates feces or waste in the form of feces. And of course, you can have various complications with this as well. You can have diarrhea. You can have all kinds of things. Maybe somebody's undergone surgeries. You have part of their intestine removed. So the overall purpose of the digestive process is for things that we take in to be broken down and absorbed, and ultimately what's left over to be excreted. And let's take an example look at our carbohydrates. So let's say you decided you're feeling weak and you have some carbs to eat. Okay, so the first thing that happens is those carbs come into contact with your saliva, right? Remember, you have the saliva, you have various enzymes in there that help break it down, and you have the mastication process, the chewing. So now you're chewing, the saliva's breaking it down, and you're also forming a bolus, right? You've coated the bolus, and now you are ready to take another bite. And prior to doing that, you swallow the bolus. The bolus, as it goes down, pushes the epiglottis shut, preventing the bolus from entering the trachea, moving down the esophagus. And once the bolus passes that, it will open again, opening your trachea. And now the bolus traveling down the trachea will enter the stomach via passage of the lower esophageal sphincter. Once in the stomach, remember, you bring it into contact with all the gastric juices, help for further breakdown. It goes through all four regions of the stomach. When you exit the stomach, you go through that sphincter into the small intestine. Remember, the small intestine primarily serves as absorption of nutrients. So in the case of carbohydrates, if we break them down to the last level as far as we can, we now have monosaccharides. Those monosaccharides are absorbed in the small intestine. They're absorbed as they pass through the lumen of the small intestine, getting into contact with all of those microvilli. The microvilli pick them up. Remember, the main function of microvilli is to increase surface area and absorption. The microvilli pick them up, and they go through the apical border, passing through the basolateral membrane layer, and then enter the bloodstream or the lymph to where they need to go. After this, what's left? Of course, we enter the large intestine via the ileocecal sphincter. Again, ileo from ileum, cecal from colon, ileocecal sphincter. You're going from small to large intestine, where absorption of water and electrolytes occurs. And of course, whatever we don't use from this point on is formed as feces to be excreted. And again, all the various enzymes that come into play along the GI tract, all the movements, the segmentation within the small intestine, the different types of muscles, all those play a role in the digestive process. And you can have various types of problems. You can have dysphagia starting at the very beginning, problems swallowing. You can have, again, some type of sphincter malfunction leading to GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. You may even have, after surgery, a specific portion of your intestine removed, not allowing the absorption of nutrients to take place as well. So all those things can be, and diarrhea, need to be taken into consideration when thinking about this. And that concludes our very quick summary of the digestive system. Thank you, guys.